Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Meher Sher and these are the headlines. Pakistan's President Arif Alvi says the Kashmir dispute should be resolved for peace in the region. Addressing the Pakistan Day military parade in Islamabad, he said Pakistan is fully equipped to defend its territorial integrity and sovereignty. He added Pakistan's desire for peace should not be taken as its weakness, as any misadventure will receive a befitting response. Meanwhile, all military and paramilitary forces participated in March past, while Air Chief Marshal Zahir Ahmed Babar led the flypast on an F-16 fighter jet. Top civil military leadership and foreign dignitaries attended the parade. North Korea has fired 2 ballistic missiles into the sea near Japan days after it launched 2 short-range missiles. Japan's Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga said the launch represents a threat to peace and stability in the region and violates UN resolutions. Earlier, U.S. President Joe Biden downplayed Pyongyang's short-range missile test, saying it was not a provocation. The U.S. and the European Union have agreed to work hand-in-hand for a de-escalation in the eastern Mediterranean. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken met with EU Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell in Brussels to discuss a wide range of foreign policy issues. In a joint statement, they also agreed to relaunch a bilateral dialogue on China and work together to address Russia's challenging behavior. In Myanmar, thousands of pro-democracy activists took to the streets a day after a nationwide silent strike. Police broke up a street demonstration in the city of Molamine, injuring 2 people and arresting 20 others. Activists say at least 286 people have been killed by security forces since February 1st. Brazil's COVID-19 death toll has topped 300,000 with over 2,000 deaths in the last 24 hours. Pakistan's death count has crossed 14,000 as 63 more people died, while nearly 4,000 tested positive for the virus overnight. Globally, the virus has claimed over 2.7 million lives and infected more than 124 million people so far. Well, those were the headlines. More news in detail after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. And now for the news in more detail. Pakistan's President Arif Alvi says the Kashmir dispute should be resolved for peace in the region. The president was addressing the Pakistan Day parade in Islamabad as the chief guest. More details in this report. March commemorates the historic Lahore Resolution, which led to the creation of Pakistan. The resolution was presented by the then Chief Minister of Bengal, A.K. Fazul Haq, at Minto Park, Lahore. The Joint Services Pakistan Day Parade was held with full zeal at Shakarpariya Parade Ground in Islamabad. Top civil and military leadership, as well as foreign dignitaries, including Sri Lanka's military leadership, attended the annual event. It kicked off with Air Chief Marshal Zahir Ahmed Babar leading the flypast on an F-16 fighter jet, while formations of F-16, JF-17, Mirage, AWACs, P-3C Orion, and ATR aircraft participated in the flypast. All military and paramilitary forces participated in the march past. While fighter jets and aircraft of Pakistan Air Force and Navy conducted flypast, Missile Corps Nasser battlefield ballistic missile, Babur 1 cruise missile, Shaheen ballistic missile, and domestically made drones were proudly displayed. Pak Army Aviation's Cobra and Mi-35 gunship helicopters also presented their skills. Pakistan's Pride JF-17 Thunder displayed unique maneuvers, while Pakistani and Turkish pilots on F-16 fighter jets presented their skills on the sky. Addressing the Pakistan Day parade, President Arif Alvi said India is violating international laws by carrying out atrocities in occupied Kashmir. Alvi said Pakistan and the world community have been raising concerns over Indian brutalities in the occupied valley, especially after the revocation of Article 370. He said the enemy should not consider Pakistan's desire for peace in the region as our weakness. President Alvi said Pakistan is equipped to defend its territorial integrity and sovereignty, categorically stating that any misadventure will receive a befitting response. Alvi also paid tribute to the country's armed forces and civilians for their sacrifices in the fight against terrorism. The president said Pakistan successfully fought the war against the coronavirus pandemic with limited resources, setting an example for several developed nations. Later, the skydivers of the forces from Bahrain, Iraq, Palestine, Sri Lanka, and Turkey exhibited freefall, carrying national flags and those of services. A Turkish military band on the occasion presented different tunes of Pakistani national songs. The parade also showcased the local cultures of the 4 provinces as floats from Sindh, Punjab, Balochistan, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, Gilgit-Baltistan, and Azad Kashmir were featured during the ceremony. Different national songs were also presented on the occasion from the float of ISPR. Dole Party presented different colors of the country's diverse culture. The floats of Ministry of Science and Technology and the frontline healthcare workers against COVID-19 were also part of the parade. Prime Minister Imran Khan was unable to attend as he is currently in quarantine after testing positive for COVID-19. And moving on, North Korea has fired 2 ballistic missiles into the sea near Japan. This comes after Pyongyang launched 2 short-range non-ballistic cruise missiles off the west coast on Sunday. Japan's Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga said the launch poses a threat to regional peace and stability and violates UN resolutions. He said he will thoroughly discuss North Korea with U.S. President Joe Biden during his visit next month. Meanwhile, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has called for efforts to maintain peace in the Korean peninsula. In a statement after a meeting with his South Korean counterpart, Chung Eui-young in Seoul, Lavrov warned against all kinds of military activities in the region. And the U.S. and the EU have agreed to work together to de-escalate the Eastern Mediterranean. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken met EU Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell in Brussels. In a joint statement, they said both U.S. and EU want a cooperative and mutually beneficial relationship with Turkey. Blinken and Borrell also agreed to launch a dialogue on China and work together to address Russia's confrontational behavior. Borrell said the 2 sides will continue to work for the U.S. return to the Iran nuclear deal. Earlier, Blinken said the U.S. will not force any NATO ally to pick between Washington and Beijing. Speaking at NATO headquarters, he added, countries can work with China where possible. In Myanmar, thousands of pro-democracy activists took to the streets a day after a nationwide silent strike. This marks the 51st straight day of demonstrations against the military coup. Street protests are being held in the commercial capital Yangon, the central city of Moniwa, and several other towns. Police broke up a street demonstration in the city of Malamine and arrested 20 people. At least 2 people were injured, but there were no other reports immediately of casualties elsewhere. Activists say at least 286 people have been killed by security forces since February 1st. Meanwhile, the U.S. says it is planning to impose sanctions on 2 conglomerates controlled by Myanmar's military. And the death toll from COVID-19 in Brazil has crossed 300,000 with more than 2,000 fatalities in the last 24 hours. Globally, the virus has claimed 2.7 million lives and infected more than 124 million people so far. More details in this report. With the cases surging across the globe once again and discrepancies surrounding vaccine drives rising, the world is now seeing an unprecedented COVID-19 crisis. AstraZeneca has lowered its vaccine effectiveness to 76% after criticism of an earlier report for using outdated information. However, Canada updated the product label for the Oxford jab to provide information on very rare reports of blood clots. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization says reports of extremely rare blood clots should not deter governments from distributing the vaccine. In the United States, President Joe Biden announced the release of $81 billion from the COVID-19 relief bill for school reopenings. Meanwhile, in Brazil, the outbreak is reaching its worst stage, fanned by patchy vaccine rollout and a lack of nationwide strategy.
The model for coping with the pandemic in Brazil has been completely disastrous. For the country to reduce this damage in the future, we have to create a federal pact to bring together the federal government with the state and municipal sectors so that Brazilians feel safer when it comes to the compliance of rules for effectiveness and prevention, and also for a rapid increase in the speed of the vaccination.
The EU and the UK say they are working together on specific steps to create a win-win situation and expand vaccine supply. In France, the number of COVID-19 patients in intensive care units keep rising, setting new highs for 2021. Belgium is set to impose a new lockdown again to contain a rising third wave.
We have seen that the contaminations double almost every 2 weeks. We see that the level of circulation of the virus is at the highest level for 4 months. We see that pressure is building on our intensive care units, which is likely to become unsustainable in the long term.
And UNICEF says India will likely delay the deliveries of vaccine doses to the COVAX facility for March and April. India's daily COVID-19 infections have risen to 5-month high with over 53,000 overnight cases. Meanwhile, Pakistan's coronavirus positivity ratio has shot past 10% as the country battles a third wave of the pandemic. With 63 more deaths reported in the last 24 hours, the toll has crossed 14,000. Nearly 4,000 people tested positive overnight, the highest single-day rise in cases since July 2020. This marks the 8th straight day that Pakistan has reported more than 3,000 new infections. The country has so far recorded more than 640,000 cases, of which 588,000 people have recovered. The health ministry says the number of active cases in the country is approaching 38,000. The ministry said more than 2,500 people are in a critical condition across the country. And Russia has acknowledged Pakistan's active and constructive role to find a sustainable solution to the Afghan war. In a press briefing, Russia's presidential envoy for Afghanistan, Zamir Kabulov, said Pakistan is one of the key players in the peace process. Kabulov said Russia looks forward to the continued and equally active role of Islamabad to bring peace to Afghanistan. The Russian special envoy also proposed the establishment of an interim coalition government to end the deadlock in Afghanistan. He said the formation of an interim government is only available realistic option. He said Kabul and the Taliban must end the hostilities and find a formula for joint governance. More stories after a short break. Stay with us. We're back. China has urged the United States to stop discriminatory measures against Chinese firms. This comes after Washington adopted measures to kick some foreign companies off its stock exchanges. At a news briefing, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Hua Chunying said U.S. measures distort market principle. Earlier, shares in dual-listed Chinese companies fell sharply after U.S. securities started their delisting process. The law aims to remove Chinese firms if they fail to comply with auditing standards for more than 3 years. It also requires the firms to prove they are not owned by the Chinese or any other foreign government. Moving on, China and Saudi Arabia have vowed to oppose interference in internal affairs of the countries. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi and Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman made the remarks in a meeting in the Saudi city of Neom. Wang Yi said advancing ties with Riyadh is a priority for China's Middle East policies. He expressed support for Saudi Arabia's greater role in the region. The two also discussed the Palestinian and Israel issue and called for a two-state solution. Meanwhile, Mohammed bin Salman said China is a world power with significant influence, stressing that its rise is inevitable. He said Saudi Arabia is ready to join hands with China to uphold the principles of the UN Charter and safeguard global peace and stability. And British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has said the government would look at sending troops to Yemen if the conditions were right. Addressing a Commons Committee for Foreign Affairs, Johnson said there has been no specific request or suggestion for UK engagement so far. Johnson said the situation would have to be very different before British military's involvement in the war. Meanwhile, the Marib offensive by Houthis has intensified in recent days, prompting sweeping air raids by Saudi-led coalition. Washington has again called for an immediate end to Marib offensive, saying all parties should come to a dialogue table. However, the U.S. and UN have welcomed the Yemeni government's decision to clear 4 fuel ships to enter through Hodeidah port. Moscow says NATO has to choose either confrontation or cooperation with Russia. Russia's envoy to Vienna, Konstantin Gavrilov, says the North Atlantic Alliance is trying to eat its cake and have it too. He said it is impossible to establish mutual trust if NATO continues its military buildup along Russia's borders. Gavrilov said in such conditions, efforts to modernize arms control measures will have no effect. He added that Russia has initiated domestic procedures for withdrawal from the Open Skies Treaty. Russia initially announced withdrawal from the agreement after the U.S. pulled out last year. Doctors Without Borders says Ethiopian soldiers killed at least 4 civilians in the northern Tigray region. In a statement, the international medical charity said the men were dragged off buses and executed by soldiers. MSF said federal troops also beat up an agency member and leveled life threats. It called for the protection of civilians and for armed groups to respect the delivery of humanitarian assistance, including medical aid. Earlier, the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission said Eritrean soldiers killed more than 100 civilians in the Tigray conflict. International rights agencies have called for an independent investigation into the reports of war crimes in Tigray. And a Soyuz 2.1B rocket has successfully launched 36 OneWeb satellites into the orbit. This comes as the London-based company continues its recovery from a tough 2020. European launch provider Arianespace launched the rocket from Vostochny Cosmodrome in Russia's Far East. The OneWeb satellites were put into near-polar orbit at an altitude of 450 kilometers. The satellites were launched as part of the company's effort to provide global high-speed internet access. It aims to provide internet access including 3G, LTE, 5G, and Wi-Fi coverage in remote areas. Meet Germany's puzzle king, Peter Schubert, who claims to have put together the world's largest jigsaw. More details in this report. It has taken a German puzzle enthusiast 4.5 months to put together a 54,000-piece jigsaw he claims is the biggest in the world. This vast jigsaw is 8.64 meters long and 2.04 meters high and shows an art gallery complete with visitors admiring the walls. They are adorned with famous artworks like Gustav Klimt's The Kiss, Monet's Poppies, and Girl with a Pearl Earring by Johann Vermeer.
Also für das Projekt mit 54.000 Teilen habe ich 4,5 Monate gebraucht. Und am Tag puzzle ich dann bei diesem Projekt zwischen 4 und 5 Stunden und einmal in der Woche einen ganzen Tag, so eine Art Marathon mit 12 bis 14 Stunden.
What began as a distraction for Peter Schubert around 16 years ago is now his leitmotif. Schubert says he has assembled around 430,000 pieces in his life and still finds it thrilling.
Also ich muss auch zugeben, ich mache die Tausender genauso gern, weil es ist ja der Spaß und der Kick dabei, muss man auch die Teile suchen. Und ob man jetzt ein großes oder ein kleines macht, ich finde immer, jedes Puzzle hat seinen Reiz.
Schubert, who aims to reach the mark of assembling 500,000 pieces with his next work, is now waiting to see his achievement listed in the Guinness Book of World Records. Sky's the limit has become obsolete thinking when it comes to the U.S. Space Agency's futuristic ambitions. Several attempts were made in the past for sending successful missions on Mars, but all proved futile. However, NASA's planned flight on Mars using its Ingenuity helicopter aims to change all of that. This report has the details. NASA scientists are hopeful that the Ingenuity helicopter flight will be the end of a difficult journey spanning 6 years. In a press conference at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California, scientists said the flight will become an aircraft's first on another planet.
Ingenuity will open new possibilities and will spark questions for the future about what we could accomplish with an aerial explorer. Could we image areas not visible from space or that a rover couldn't reach, like shadowed craters with seasonal water flow? Could a helicopter scout ahead for rovers and help plot the most efficient course for the best science?
The Ingenuity landed on Mars on the 18th of February, the most advanced astrobiology lab ever sent to another world. The Perseverance is on a mission to search for traces of ancient microbial life on the red planet. NASA scientists are hopeful that if the experiment becomes successful, it will represent a Wright brothers moment.
It has been a long journey, and everything from test programs that had failures in the early days, and you can roll the video, all the way culminating in actually building a Ingenuity flight model that is flight-worthy and can go to Mars. We have done a lot of testing, everything from the mechanisms to going into our 25-foot space chamber, which simulates the atmosphere of Mars.
Since the start of the Cold War, competition between the then Soviet Union and the U.S. to conquer space was an ever-present theme. The Soviets were the first to fly air vehicles on another world with their Vega balloons in the atmosphere of Venus in the 1980s. On to the latest in business. European stocks are trading mixed after investors pulled back over the surge in COVID-19 cases in the region. The sentiment has taken a further hit as EU leaders discuss possible blocks on vaccine exports. The Pan-European Stock 600, Frankfurt DAX, and the CAC 40 in Paris have shed marginally. London's FTSE and Italy's FTSE MIB have managed to claw up fractionally above the flat line. Earlier, Asian markets also traded mixed, with mainland Chinese stocks and shares in Hong Kong shedding, while all other major bourses edged up. On to sports. The Olympic torch relay has set off from Fukushima, beginning a 4-month countdown to the Summer Games in Tokyo. About 10,000 runners will carry the torch across Japan's 47 prefectures and far-flung islands. Members of the Japanese national women's soccer team lit the Tokyo 2021 torch with the Olympic flame. The first section of the relay did not have spectators to prevent large crowds amid COVID-19 precautions. Speaking at the opening ceremony, Tokyo 2020 President Seiko Hashimoto said the Olympic flame was kept alive quietly but powerfully for the past year.
I hope that the flame of the Tokyo Olympics will become a sacred, powerful and warm light that brings hope to all those around Japan, and a ray of light through the darkness which connects the path to the future.
And in tennis, American Sam Querrey has been ousted of the Miami Open after a first-round loss to Taiwan's Liu Yansun. Liu beat Querrey 6-3, 6-4 in just over an hour and 10 minutes. Querrey failed to capitalize on 2 breakpoint chances he created, while Liu converted both his opportunities. Liu will now face the top seed Russian Daniil Medvedev in the next round. In other fixtures, American Marcos Giron overcame compatriot Tommy Paul 7-6, 6-4, while Frenchman Hugo Gaston bested Germany's Dominik Kopfer 6-1, 6-4 to advance further. And 29 years ago on this day, Pakistan lifted its first ever Cricket World Cup in 1992. The zealous fans of the game will remember the historic triumph of the Green Caps forever. Pakistan beat England by 22 runs in the final at Melbourne Cricket Ground in Australia to lift the trophy. Current Prime Minister and team captain at the time, Imran Khan, led Pakistan in the tournament and the final. Magical spell by Pakistan's Sultan of Swing, Wasim Akram, turned the game on its head when he took 2 wickets on 2 balls. He remained the highest wicket taker in the event with 18 wickets. Former Pakistan skipper Misbah-ul-Haq recalls the historic triumph as a prime motivation for him and many others.
FSC में था मैं उस टाइम और स्पेशली न्यूजीलैंड और ऑस्ट्रेलिया की टाइमिंग ऐसी थी कि आपको सुबह उठ के मैच देखना होता था और उसमें जो इन्वॉल्वमेंट थी ये भी मुझे याद है जिस तरीके से सेमीफाइनल पाकिस्तान जीता और फिर फाइनल जीता। आई थिंक स्पेशल मेमोरीज़ हैं और उसके बाद क्रिकेट का शौक़ और क्रिकेट का जो जज्बा है वो सब में जिस तरीके से उभरा, आई थिंक मेरे लिए भी बहुत बड़ी मोटिवेशन थी।
For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.